the teachings in the Talmud for ethics and the way to live. We've been calling this Talmudic wisdom for life, and we are ready for another reading. This reading is from chapter 6, which is studied this week in many communities. So, what we see here is the very end of chapter 6, and therefore the very end of Pirkei Avos readings. And here we say, everything God created in his world, he did not create but for his glory. Now, what does that mean? It's a little bit of a tricky term. First of all, the term glory we're used to in other contexts, but the way it's used in the Torah, when discussion of God's presence, of God's glory, God's expression, God's revelation, God's presence being found, being felt, being recognized. God's expression, God's revelation, God's presence being found. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that means. I'm just going to mute everyone because there's a little bit of feedback. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to unmute yourself along the way. So really this idea that everything is created to be a part of God's revelation, to be a part of expressing God, is a revolutionary idea. It's revolutionary in the expectation that we expect everything to be a positive contribution. And it's revolutionary, especially in the opportunity, that this means that there's opportunity for everything and for everyone in this world to be a part of something good. Now, what does this all mean? What does it mean that everything is created for God's glory, for God's revelation? So we have to understand that from a mystical perspective, as the Kabbalah teaches us, we're really part of a project. All of humankind and all of our universe is really part of a project. Now, that doesn't mean that it's a simulation or an alien accident that some people may believe, that we live in some kind of a virtual reality created by some other galaxy. There's that theory, or that there's been an accident among the aliens and we popped out, or that some little green men have a project called humankind. What this does mean, more seriously speaking, is that this is a divine intentional project which God created this world for a purpose, and we all are a part of that purpose. And when it's good to be part of a divine project, part of God's project, because success is guaranteed. So you might sometimes sign up for some kind of big project for a big company, doing something really big, and it looks really promising. You might invest a lot into it, but there's no guarantee. Sometimes those projects get pulled. Sometimes they fail. This is the one that will make it to the end because it's God's project. Now, what the project is, what the goal here is finding and expressing God, finding and expressing the divine presence in everything that's in this world. See, God created this world, and God is behind it all, and God gives it all life and gives it all what it is. But as we know, we don't see that, we don't experience that. God's presence is there, but God's presence is concealed within everything in our universe, within everything in our lives. He created it, he animates it, he brings it about, but a lot of people don't recognize that. And even if we're aware of that, we don't see it or necessarily feel it in any kind of tangible way. What we can do, though, is discover that and reveal that. If we apply ourselves to this universe properly, and if we live the right life, we can find God and find God's presence in everything we do and in everything that's around us. And we can reveal that and make that something that comes more out in the open. We can find the goodness and find the divine in everything that exists, and really through that make this world a better place. This, we've talked about before, culminates with the coming of the Mashiach. The Mashiach's coming and the time of the Mashiach, the Messianic era, the better future we hope for, is the outcome of all these generations of making this world that better place, of finding God's presence in this world. So we say the world is created, everything that God created is only created for his glory, for God's presence to be expressed, for God's revelation. That means every step, every creation, everything around us can be a positive contribution, can be something where God's presence is felt, and it's up to us to reveal that. When we do reveal that and we do express that, we make this world the better place that we hope and pray for all the time. Now, because today is the 17th of Tammuz, and the 17th of Tammuz in the Hebrew calendar is a fast day, which means that I haven't eaten today, but it's over soon, don't worry. As soon as it gets dark enough outside. It is a fast day because it's a day of mourning. It's a day of mourning, and it begins the 3-week period of mourning for the temple in Jerusalem. And what that means is that on the 17th of Tammuz, there's a bit of a discussion what exactly happened historically, but there were many tragedies on this day, and particularly the walls of Jerusalem were breached, or the walls surrounding the temple were breached, and the enemy made it in to Jerusalem, which ultimately resulted in the destruction of the temple and the exile of the Jewish people 3 weeks later. That's what we will be fasting again on 3 weeks from today on the 9th of Av. So this is an appropriate day and appropriate time to discuss the ancient temple in Jerusalem and to discuss our hope for a new temple in Jerusalem. Now, what is a temple? What does it mean that there's a holy temple in Jerusalem? It's not just a synagogue. It's not just a place to pray that we still have today, thank God. But that's meant to be a holy and godly place, a place where God's presence is felt, a place where God's presence is revealed, a place where we take physical matter, stones, and other materials, and we build what would be called a home for God in this physical world. So the temple in Jerusalem is really the ultimate of what we're discussing here. It's the idea that we can find God's presence in the world around us, that everything that exists reveals God, that everything that exists is there to reveal God's glory, as we read, that everything has that potential. And we take lots of physical materials, we build this temple in Jerusalem, we build this holy place where God's presence is felt. Now, the idea was that it shouldn't only be in Jerusalem. That place of goodness, that place of a connection to God, that place of recognizing what's higher and beyond us shouldn't only be in Jerusalem, but from there it should influence the world around us. And that's why the previous temples that we had were not good enough. So there have been 2 temples in our history. In Jerusalem, the Solomon's temple, that means the original Beis Hamikdash, the original temple, which stood for 410 years, it's destroyed by the Babylonians. And then the second temple, which was rebuilt 7 years later and then destroyed 420 years after that, early in the Common Era, about 68 or 70 of the Common Era, destroyed by the Romans. Now, those were these places. The temple was this place where God's presence was felt. But the goal wasn't yet fully achieved because the rest of the world wasn't yet fully changed. The ultimate will be with the coming of the Mashiach, when the temple is rebuilt, and this time its influence will be felt truly and completely in the entire world around us. We'll find God, we'll be able to see and experience God's presence in everything. As we read, everything God created is as revealing his presence. But let's look back to the Mishnah. Let's look back to the reading to see something quite interesting and actually quite empowering. So we said that everything that God created in his world, he did not create but for his glory. So everything is there to make a contribution in revealing God's presence. Now that's everything without exception. everything is able to make a contribution. And that means that everything has a unique contribution. Because if the way I reveal God's presence or the positive benefit that I bring to this world is the same as yours, we didn't need both of us. So, in other words, the evidence that everything, every person and every creation and every being can make this positive contribution, the evidence is because God created. Because God created it, that means God did so deliberately, God did so purposefully. God created this one additional human being, and God created this one additional opportunity, and God created this one additional creature, this one additional plant, or whatever it is. Why did God go ahead and create it? It didn't just happen. Somebody did it. Why did God do it? God went ahead and created it because that can contribute as well. That can add something that nobody else can. So if somebody we meet, or something that we interact with, or a moment in time or opportunity in life could not make a positive contribution, God wouldn't have to create it. If it would make the same achievement as somebody else, God wouldn't need to create it or him or her. If God did go ahead and do that deliberate step and create this additional being, this additional creation, that's because that makes an additional contribution. So this is a very powerful way to look at ourselves and to look at those around us and to say there's something unique that I and he and she and this and that can contribute, that nobody else can replace. And it's up to us to realize the full potential of that. And it's up to us to respect and appreciate that in the people around us and never look down at them because there's something that they could do that we cannot do. And this really takes us to the next point, which again, we should read the Mishnah carefully to see this additional idea. Reading the same words again, we see that everything God created in his world, he did not create but for his glory. That's a double negative. He did not create but for his glory. It doesn't say, the Mishnah is not written in a form of saying he created it for his glory, but he did not create it but for his glory. He only created it in order to make that contribution. So it's not as if there is also some nice thing we can do, but that's really why we're here. And that's really why this was created and why everything is here to begin with. Now, this is illustrated by something we know about the temple and really the Mishkan, which was the mobile temple the Jews had in the desert as they wandered. Something we are taught and quite fascinating, because the Mishkan, this mobile temple, was built out of individual beams, which were each put into a socket when they would camp and they needed to set up the temple. And the roof, as well as the walls around those beams, were covered with curtains or tapestries, these fabrics. And the Torah goes into detail describing what these should be made from. And one of the materials is something called tachash skins. So a fur or leather, some kind of skin of a creature called a tachash. Now, what is a tachash? So we don't really know. We don't have a clear identity of what this creature was that they used for these furs or create these fabrics over the Mishkan. We do know that the Talmud says that this was a creature that existed only then. And after that time, went extinct. So it was actually created by God only for that purpose. And once that purpose was complete, It had no longer had a reason for existence and no longer did exist. So the Tachash is something where we see in a tangible sense that its contribution was meant to be a part of this Mishkan, to be a part of this home for God. And therefore was only around for as long as was necessary to do that. For the rest of us, and for the rest of our universe, we do lots of things. And not everything we do is always part of that goal of revealing God's presence. But the Tachash reminds us, this idea reminds us what we read just now in the Mishnah, that truthfully, when we get to the bottom of it, we were only created to begin with in order to reveal God's presence, in order to be a part of this positive change of making this world a better place. So this is for us to think about, because we tend to think that we'll pay our dues. Our human nature almost is like to say, okay, I'm going to pay my dues. I'm going to do what I need to do to check off the box and to say, I've done something for God too. I've done something for Judaism too. I've done something for making this world a better place. I've done my part. Now I'm free to go and pursue whatever it is I want to do. But the Mishnah says that actually this contribution and this positive impact we will have, and this revealing God's presence, is everything about who we are. It's everything about why we were created. It's everything about why we are here. In other words, we're not Jewish only in the shul. We're not serving God. We're not doing what's right only when we say, okay, now I'm going to go to the synagogue and I'm going to pray, or now I'm going to do my mitzvah to do my part, and then I'm off the hook. That's not how it works, but it should be in everything that we do. Everything that we do and every part of how we live our lives should be contributing to our positive change and our revelation of God in this world. Now, in a practical sense, the Talmud says, Kol masecha yiu l'shem shamayim. Everything you do should be for the sake of heaven. In other words, we go to work, we go to friends, when that's safe. We go and pursue our hobbies and our interests. We go and do whatever it is that we do. But all of those things should be done with the intention, with the recognition that this can also contribute. So we might be doing actual mitzvahs and actually making this world a better place and making this world a divine place in direct form only at a certain time, or only in a little bit of the day, or only in a certain part of our life. And the rest of it feels like we're just doing regular stuff. We're just doing the mundane things, the regular things we do. We're just doing our job. We're just going about life. But we should be trying to be aware of how is all of that l'shem shamayim? How is all of that for the sake of heaven? How does all of that contribute? How is all of this part of the greater good that we do? So in other words, if we're doing that mitzvah or those good things part of the time, do we recognize, do we appreciate that the other things we do, whether it's earning a living or anything else, keeping ourselves healthy, is that's all to contribute to that good purpose? We can give everything we do a higher purpose. We can make everything we do in our lives be a part of revealing God's glory, as we read, even if it doesn't do so necessarily directly. It's just a regular thing, but it can be a part of it when we are aware that this is contributing to our ability to do the mitzvah, or this is contributing to our ability to affect positive change. So as we go about life, we should be going about building the temple. We should be going about rebuilding the temple making this world the messianic place, the holy place, the place where God's presence is felt. And that's not only in the mitzvahs that we do, but in everything, because everything we do can be a part of that. Let's all try to keep that in mind as we pursue whatever it is that we're each up to in our own lives. And good luck with that. With that, we're going to conclude. And before we start taking any questions or comments, I just want to remind everyone of our schedule. This is unique. We were around 7:15. Usually we'll be on at 8 o'clock. We'll continue on Monday with the DIY mitzvahs, the do-it-yourself mitzvah series. And next Thursday we will meet again. We will do a special class for next Thursday about Maimonides in honor of the conclusion of the yearly study cycle where we studied all of Maimonides' primary work. We'll talk about Maimonides as a very unique person in our history and the contribution that he made. In the meantime, I'm going to end the live stream, and please do share your comments, your questions.